start with a low, tense, percussive musical score. Sound of a heavy steel door slamming shut. Elias didn't just open locks, he understood them. He understood the silent, cold language of steel and mechanism. That's why the metallic thud of his own workshop door sealing shut was the most terrifying sound he'd ever heard. It wasn't just closed, it was dead-bolted, electromagnetically sealed and soundproofed, a prison of his own design. He was a master locksmith, sequestered in his secure basement. Now he was a prisoner, a silent figure, eyes hidden in shadow, placed a single, unremarkable aluminum briefcase on his workbench. No negotiation, no threat was uttered. Only a gesture toward the briefcase, and then toward the single item placed beside it, a faded, slightly dog-eared photograph. Sarah, his estranged daughter, walking casually across the street outside her college dormitory, a messenger bag slung over her shoulder. She was visible, she was vulnerable. The message was complete. The figure hit a button. A hostile military-grade digital timer on the briefcase flared to life, counting down from 30. 00. The figure was gone, taking the only way out. Music softens, focusing on the countdown's relentless tick. Elias didn't waste a second on fear. He ignored the tremor in his hands and let the professional take over. Analyze. The briefcase was high-grade aluminum, sealed tight. He could smell the subtle metallic tang of C4, a scent he'd trained himself to recognize years ago when consulting for security firms. But the amount of the charge seemed negligible. He quickly reached for his toolkit, grabbing the heavy-duty shears. The wires needed cutting, cleanly, immediately. But the second the cold steel of the shears touched the casing, a subtle, high-pitched whine came from the device. He paused, his breath held. The digital display didn't just stop, it leaped forward by 60 seconds. He snatched his hand back. It was a trap. The device wasn't meant to be disarmed with standard force, but with logic. Every conventional attempt to interfere with the circuit accelerated the timer. This wasn't a bomb built by a terrorist, it was a customized puzzle built by a mechanic, a professional, someone who understood the rules of security systems. Sound of metal tools clattering onto the bench. Pause. He focused on the time. The countdown was relentless. He had to stop cutting wires and start reading schematics. He spent 5 minutes, 5 precious, agonizing minutes, using a microprobe to gently pry a narrow gap in the casing. He risked another acceleration, but he needed eyes on the payload. What he saw wasn't a cavity packed with explosives. It was mostly foam insulation, cushioning a single, crucial component next to the tiny detonator, a military-grade data drive. The C4 charge was small, just enough to instantly incinerate that single chip, turning its contents to ionized smoke. This wasn't about mass destruction, it was about obliteration of data. Music ramps up slightly. Why? Why go to such extreme, personalized lengths just to destroy data that could have been wiped remotely? He ran a hand over his face, feeling the cold sweat mix with the grime of the shop. He tried to remember who would want a 30-minute countdown to ensure a chip was destroyed. 30 minutes. Enough time to panic. Enough time to make the wrong choice. Enough time to think you were a hero. The components were speaking to him now. The housing, the unique rare earth magnets used in the timer mechanism, the bespoke wiring loom. He'd seen them before. He'd sourced them before. Last year, for his biggest client, the Citibank's new vault system. Suddenly, the cold, stale air of the shop seemed to thicken. He remembered the job in vivid, painful detail. The lead bank security engineer, a man named Mr. Jensen. Bland, precise, almost obsessively concerned with disaster proofing. Jensen had specifically requested the schematics for the vault's emergency overwrite circuitry. He'd called it an intellectual exercise. Elias had laughed it off, chalking it up to Jensen's overzealous need for perfection. But Jensen hadn't wanted a diagram. He wanted the blueprint of failure. The pace of the narration slows, emphasizing the realization. The truth landed on Elias like a hammer blow. Jensen didn't want the data destroyed. He wanted Elias to think he was destroying it. This bomb was a terrifying zero-risk test of his silence. Jensen was preparing to rob the Citibank, and that data drive likely held the full schematics, codes, and timeline of the heist. Jensen needed to know that under the most extreme duress, the threat of his own child's life, Elias would prioritize the client's secret, or at least the appearance of protecting it, over his own immediate survival. The countdown was a lie. The enforcer who left the bomb was proof of Jensen's ruthlessness. If Elias had frantically sliced the casing open and tossed the drive out the window, Jensen would have known Elias was a liability, and Sarah would have paid the price. The bomb wasn't the threat. The data was the threat. Sound of a faint, high-pitched electrical hum. The real key, the real detonator, wasn't the timer or the visible wires. It was a microscopic, highly sensitive pressure sensor on the underside of the drive itself, designed to trigger the detonation if the drive was moved, jiggled, or, God forbid, removed from the casing. If Elias triggered it, the flash explosion would incinerate the drive and him. He had to ignore the loud, flashing decoy timer, which now screamed 4:30. He had to pick a lock that was barely visible, using tools that could ruin everything with a single misplaced breath. Elias selected his lightest, sharpest micro-pick, a titanium sliver he'd crafted for the most delicate jewel vault mechanisms. He brought the tool down slowly, inch by agonizing inch. The sound of his own heavy, rattling breath was a distraction. He forced it out, calming his heartbeat down to a dull, rhythmic thud. The bomb mechanism was inert, a psychological weapon, but the pressure sensor was very real. The pace becomes extremely slow, focusing on microsounds, soft clicking, breathing, the scrape of metal on metal. He had to bypass the sensor without moving the drive, a feat of stillness and precision that required every ounce of his 30 years of expertise. This was the hardest lock he'd ever picked, not a safe, but the bomb itself, a lock built of nerves and steel. The digital timer screamed the final countdown. 1 minute remaining. He slipped the point of the pick under the edge of the drive. He could feel the resistance of the sensor, waiting to spring the trap. The slightest lateral movement, and it would fail. He was fighting the physics of the weapon with the geometry of his tool. 30 seconds. He tilted the pick. A microscopic gap appeared between the drive and the sensor. 15 seconds. He held it. He could hear the sound of the timer's escalating, panicked tone. 10 seconds. 5, 4. He applied the slightest upward pressure. The tension was suffocating. He lifted the drive free, pulling it clean out of the casing. 3, 2, 1. No explosion. The silence confirmed his gamble. The timer hit 0. A harmless, insignificant beep. The workshop filled with silence. The bomb was a lie. The threat was not. Elias didn't hesitate. He tossed the inert casing aside and plugged the precious data drive into his secure terminal. Immediately, Jensen's full plan, the codes, schematics, and timeline for the city bank heist flooded his screen. He didn't call the police. That wasn't the move of a man who just stared down an assassin in a psychological trap. He was a professional, and Jensen had involved him in a game he hadn't asked to play. Elias sent an anonymous, highly encrypted message to Jensen's personal line. The words were a promise, a threat, and a declaration of war. Final sound, a single, decisive keyboard click. The locksmith is now open for business. Fade to black. Music swells, then cuts out sharply.